So just to get us started, can you provide us a bit of background about yourself?
Sure, yeah. So I'm Rob McMorran. I'm a researcher, a social researcher in RESAS in the Scottish Government, which is part of the government that basically looks after research, evidence, and analysis relating to sort of rural and environmental areas of interest to policy. And I've been there for about a year and a half, going on 2 years now, I think. And prior to that, I was a researcher in Scotland's Rural College, working mainly in the areas of sort of land use behaviours, and rural development.
Do you have any top tips for researchers to make their work attractive and useful for policy professionals?
Yeah. I mean, I think this is probably an area that, to a certain extent, I guess, has improved in research. Insofar as there's a much bigger emphasis on knowledge exchange, but I do think still a lot of the time we're kind of working in two separate kind of groups, really. And I suppose if I had one thing to say that, making it attractive and involving policy and all of that is to try to engage people kind of from the start, or, as close to the start as possible, to build those kind of relationships so that you're not just, engaging someone at the end of a project or whatever, that you're trying to identify and build in policy concerns and policy relevance and the thoughts of policy professionals from the outset. Because otherwise you're doing something, you're not actually really that aware at the start. What's the policy question that relates to this? Or you may not be fully aware of that if you haven't spoken to the right people. And so, it's embedding policy professionals in the process in as far as you can, because often it's kind of difficult to get hold of the right people and get their time and what have you. But, I suppose I kind of have a collaborative sort of a mindset. And so I'd say a top tip for me would be, try where you can to involve people early. And then on a simpler level, I suppose, increase, place emphasis on outputs that explain that in brief your project aims, your methods, but also, as I said, the caveats, the values and the main strengths of your findings and any related sort of implications for policy or policy recommendations. Policy probably generally a bit less interested in the kind of longer or the more academic outputs, but they will be aware of those and they will be interested if it's a relevance to their area. And look for opportunities, I suppose, and just kind of take them when they arise to engage with policy. Like, I think some researchers are really good at this now, but basically get to know the people of greatest relevance to your area and kind of stick with them. Certainly that's something that I did during my career when I was a researcher, was that I got to know the people. Like, I was doing a lot of work in land reform and land ownership, and I kind of got to know the people in that area, and they basically become your professional network, I suppose, and you just stay in touch with them, and it becomes normal for you to have an ongoing dialogue, and that means you're aware of what's coming up, you're aware of what's important to them, and there's just a kind of like I said, an ongoing dialogue and an awareness there that you build kind of over time. So relationships are important, and policymakers are, it really depends on what you're doing in your area, but the sort of areas that I was working in, they were really an important part of the picture, so it was important to try to include them.